Alrighty, what is up everybody? What is up traders? We are back. It is currently November 1st. So of course, as we always start these videos, you know what that means. It's gonna be the October recap. So this month is a little bit different than any month I've ever had, ever. And we'll go great in detail why that is, but essentially start it off blunt, is that I risked probably my biggest loss of my career. And unfortunately that trend has been pretty frequent this year. I've had some of my new biggest gains this year, but I've also had some of my new biggest losses. And if you followed me for my last few recaps on August and July, you know that I also experienced quite the loss on HKD, right? These two big days, these were disastrous days. This was worse. Now it didn't get worse. It wasn't worse in the end in terms of P&L, but the unrealized that I saw in front of me was quite disastrous. And I know many traders face this because it was on ILAG. Again, we'll talk about it when we get there. But the fact that I'm green and I finished the month up $96,000 is mind-boggling to me. It feels like I did not make money this month. It feels like I risked, doesn't feel like I did risk an insane amount that I've continually gone back and forth that whether I'm willing to lose that much or not. And we'll go all in detail when we get there. But just really bad. And it's I think that was the wake-up call I needed. I've taken big losses in the past. I've recovered fine. But this one was like the humbling, sobering, get your shit together or get out kind of thing. So again, we'll go right into it. Let's just go ahead and start. Right away, the first 2 days of the month, were not great at all, thanks to FNGR. FNGR was a great runner, a lot of volatility, but just the way I played it was really, really subpar. And it ultimately led to both of these days being up on the ticker and then giving it all back and then actually losing some. So not a great start to the month, and it should have been a foreshadowing to what was going to happen. But anyways, let's go into the intraday here. I mainly traded on those first 2 main days near the first top of the run. After that, I pretty much cut it off and didn't trade it ever since because I just pretty much blacklisted this ticker. I quickly realized I can't trade this in a healthy manner that doesn't lead to large losses or giving away gains. And so the first trade here was actually shorting this parabolic. It actually was a huge move. And again, if you looked at the daily chart, I don't have it on the intraday, but this thing was already up from like around $1 to $2, somewhere in there. And we're already pushing, mid fours up into 5. So I'm like, okay, wow, this is a great, right? We just pushed the 490s. 5 could be a great resistance. I'm going to short some. I do remember cutting some, but I don't remember how much. I do remember filling and cutting most, but I do remember having some on. Unfortunately, I don't remember exactly much how. I probably should start taking notes, or writing notes exactly how much I had where, because I'm finding myself forgetting more often as I review. But eventually it kept going, right? And unfortunately, not fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it. Fortunately, I still had a position on. Gratefully, it wasn't large to the point where I remember, because we'll talk about ILAG. I certainly remember ILAG very clearly, right? So if we go to the trades here, so this is this one? This is it. Actually, this might have been in a different brokerage, but same idea here. So again, in my other account, I was short here, covered most here, and then I believe I had an ad similar to that here. Both accounts this was the first time taking the trade. The other account I added to full size, risking now this little high here. And we fade very nicely. And I actually was pretty patient. I didn't cover any of this choppiness. I actually covered into solid serious weakness, right? And we bounce, I add back. And again, if some for those who know how this typically works with this kind of setup, with a parabolic, especially a parabolic on a top day and a parabolic in the morning. Parabolics in the morning are usually the best because the rest of the day is usually met with a lot of fading. Some bounces here and there, but typically any bounce is a good short because that is everyone is underwater, and you pretty much get a lot of range to the downside. And so when I covered some here, this was not my full position. I actually still had some on, and I re-added back that same ad. So any ads I had here, I immediately re-added back in this bounce. And at first, it's looking good. It's looking exactly how I thought it should. Eventually, it's going to keep chopping around and then break down to new lows and fade more. We ended up doing the opposite, right? We ended up squeezing back. My risk was still these highs with profits locked in and adding size back. So I didn't cut here. I remember adding back more in my other account, the same account that I added up here. I also added more here, and it did the same thing. I also covered in that other account and re-added this bounce. But eventually, as we keep holding and we don't break down, late day comes and we break out. So I said, absolutely not, get me out of here. And I cut it. I cut in both accounts. I cut in this one, I cut in the other one. And essentially this went from, I believe I was up over 5 figures, like low, like maybe 11, 12K, to ultimately taking 25K in losses. So a full like 30K swing or more. Really, really frustrating, very, very unnecessary. This move right here should have been the indicator that this pattern is, it was. It shouldn't have been. I should have noticed it, that this isn't going to fade like I thought. And covering into these dips or this consolidation when it was clearly holding a view up, couldn't even touch view up, was the sign you need to be sizing down if not getting out. And I probably would have gotten out for break even. Like after these ads, my average was probably in the mid to high fives, right? Which is right below this channel. So it is what it is. It sucks, but it's one of those things where I stayed over patient and I paid for it, right? And also this is somewhat of a lower float stock, which is why I typically don't like trading them. But in the same manner, the way it traded at certain areas, it didn't trade like a low float to me. I knew when it gets volatile here, yeah, it moves quickly, but when it's in this solid range, it has a lot of volume. The spread is pretty thin from what I remember, and that's why I thought I liked it. Right, and then until it didn't, I was like, oh, I don't like this ticker at all. It doesn't move how I like at all, right? And so that was that day. Again, flat overnight, didn't touch it all until the next morning. And the next morning, it completely caught me off guard, right? So I'm used to now, after seeing what it did this day, I'm like, okay, this thing can trap very easily. It can come back just when you don't know it. You need to be careful. You need to be more picky in your entries. You need to be shorting into strength. So my idea out of the open here was that I'm going to get some kind of pop into the 8s or 9s into this pre-market resistance and into this after-hours resistance, and then it's going to fail and it's going to feel really, really good. Of course, you can see here, that's not what happened. And so when this thing dumped out of the open, I just kind of was like waiting for that spike, waiting for that bounce to get a safer entry and have it never come, right? So what did end up getting short, I guess I did have a starter pre-market, but I remember this being incredibly much smaller than I would have wanted. If again, in hindsight, had I known it was just going to dump out the open, this should have been full size. This wasn't even like maybe not even 20% of my position I wanted. And so unfortunately, by this time, I realized like this thing isn't bouncing. It's very heavy. It's very weak. So I actually add more times than I would not add here. I would like some kind of a bounce, but just again, flipping, not flipping my bias, but flipping my expectations very quickly, realizing that this is super heavy, and if it hasn't bounced now, it's likely not going to bounce and going to keep going lower. And I was right. I didn't add as much as I wanted again because in my mind I'm chasing, right? It would have much more size at a +8 average. With these ads here, I now have like a mid to low 7s average, so certainly not ideal at all. But again, my thesis was right. It did get them going lower. I covered some, and again, it stays super weak. Right, what I thought should have been yesterday after the parabolic happened this day, and so unfortunately, I'm actually not even making it big for you guys to see here. Let's make it bigger. But this whole action, like I said, it's just weaker, and I can't help but think this thing is still up from like $1, $1 to $2, right? And we're at 6. And again, any first red day is statistically leading or does lead to a second red day, right? And so because it was so weak, I'm like, okay, you know what? I want to get short into these bounces, right? I want to get a bounce into late day, and then tomorrow morning we should have a small gap down and potentially a second red day to maybe mid 4s or at least below the low a day today, which is like 5. As you can see here, we don't do that, and unfortunately, I just gave this way too much wide of a risk. I really should have risked red green, if not these like previous bounces. And we go over that. I'm almost like in denial, right? I can't believe it. I can't believe this thing was so weak all day to just come back and give all those gains back in a matter of 10 minutes, right? Hours of selling to just be recouped by a little bit of buying. So I couldn't believe it. And so I thought, in after hours, let's see if it fades. It holds green. And when we squeeze here, I'm like, you know what? I'm out. I'm done. Do not want to deal with it anymore. So that turned into, again, another, I think it was up around 9 to 10K after this morning here. after this move here. And by the time I covered here, I was then down 16. So again, it is the same pattern, essentially, in terms of emotional and same pattern in terms of P&L. Okay, just really, really annoying. And once that happened, it's like very rarely has that ever happened to me on a ticker. One where I've been so whiplashed back into a negative P&L, but also two, to be, again, a much bigger loss than I expected, and just happened to be so caught off guard for me. Like, my read on it was just so off that I pretty much blacklisted it. And I'm so glad I did, because it probably would have led to more losses. Because again, seeing it the next morning, having a gap down and fade right back down to where I was entering into this bounce, made me feel really crappy, because I'm like, okay, here comes the second red day, like just like I thought, and then what do you know, a whole nother squeeze higher, right? So this definitely would have led to another loss had I taken it again. So glad I didn't. And then again, just the next weeks, it's just chopping around, does pull here, but this isn't really a pattern that I know from like a daily perspective. This isn't something I really know. I mean, yeah, you can call this like a fake out breakout. I know some traders are fans of that. It's never been something I do, so I did miss this. And even now, we're still holding up here. We've never really gone significantly below that $5 area, which I thought we should do in a second red day. So completely off, tough first 2 days of the month. But the third day was a big rebound and comeback thanks to GTII. So if you watch the very end of my September recap, right? September's before October? Duh, yeah. I talk about how GTII is a big potential play coming up. And I even said, I remember I actually watched my end of my video just to see how accurate or how what I was saying was going to follow into this month. And I said, I think it can go higher. I think it could go lower. But ultimately, I was like, I know if this thing has any kind of action like it did on this Friday or whatever, or this last day of the month, we could see 6, 7. I said, hell, we could even go to like 10, like CYDY did. And what do you know? We actually go to 9. So pretty impressive. Unfortunately, the frustrating part about this is that the broker I wanted to short it at was on buy-ins. And for those who don't know how that works, is if, and this isn't true for all brokers, this is true for Cobra in particularly. Hopefully they get rid of this, because this is my least favorite thing about them, is that if they're looking to buy a stock in, like if you know short selling works, you get bought in if you hold too long. If anyone is getting bought in at the broker, they have to like have a count on how many shares are available, and so they don't let you borrow anymore, right? They don't even if you're not, it doesn't matter if you're short, doesn't matter if you're getting bought in or not. If there are buy-ins by someone else at the firm or at the broker, they're not going to let anyone borrow the stock until buy-ins are done. I could be wrong on there. Cobra, if you're listening, please correct me. But every time I've talked to them, that's how I've understood it. And so unfortunately, they were buy-ins today. So I could not reserve shares. And to see this thing go so parabolic, I mean, this is the most beautiful. I mean, this is a reverse dip buy, guys. And you know much how I love panic dip buys on the long side. I also, again, love parabolic shorts. But parabolic shorts on an OTC market you don't see very often. And when you see one like this, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I tried to refrain from thinking how much I could have made if I actually had shares and timed this. But considering they gave you 2 whole minutes of turning here before it really just dumps from the high 8s back down to 550. Gosh, it would have been a big win, guys. It would have been big. Could I have been a little early? Because some parabolics I am early. Maybe I would have gotten a little fake out here, taking some losses. But ultimately, being how smooth this was a runner as I was watching in real time, one of the best parabolics in the OTC market I've seen in a very, very long time. It would have been very, very cool to participate in. Fortunately, I didn't. I didn't dip buy it. Unfortunately, this because these 3 really fake out bounces definitely would have caught me. Finally, it does bounce, but again, I kind of ignored them on these fake out buys. So by this time, I just didn't take it seriously to actually bounce officially. And the rest of the day, we just chop around. Right, we're kind of in this channel up and down. The next day, I'm looking for the first red day now, because right, you saw that daily chart. We go from pretty much $1 to 9, close at like 670 it is or whatever it is, and I'm thinking this is going to be a big red day, right? If this thing fails, if this thing can't get over these particular resistance levels, we're due for a large red day. And what do you know? The next day there are still buy-ins, and so I'm pissed. I'm practically tilted in the morning. I'm like, I can't believe it. I'm going to miss this. This is one of the best OTC runners of the year. Yada yada yada. Now the good part is about what Cobra does is that if they do end up buying everyone in by the end of the day, they do let you let you borrow it. It's not like they it's not like they close off the ticker all day long. if they do end up finishing buy-ins, they do let you short. And luckily, they only had about a minute of buy-ins. So like this little minute here, this little spike was pretty much, if I had to guess, brokers along with Cobra, maybe some others, and maybe some longs too. It's not all people getting bought in, but there was just a little moment of buying, and then the moment that ended, just collapsing. And so unfortunately, in hindsight, right, if I actually had shares pre-market, if I was able to borrow earlier, this spike, I would have been all over. I would have loved getting short right into 7, risking, these resistance levels, maybe risking 750, and then once it actually started getting weak and going new low day, I would have been trying to short as much as I possibly could, given within my risking, that 750 or at that point new high day, to get short. Now, what actually happened, because buy-ins lasted a minute, and then I started borrowing some as quickly as I could, I didn't start getting fills until, let's go to this one here, until much lower, like 50 cents or more lower, right? I didn't start filling until 650, and I didn't start getting actual like size until like 620, 630. You see me, I do add a little bit more here on this bounce, this bounce to VWAP, which is around just below 6. It 590s kept selling like a ton. And so I took that as a sign of, it's not gonna, similar to kind of like Finger, right? Like it's so heavy, this bounce is not moving anywhere. There's a lot of sellers. I need to be a little aggressive here. And so I did that, right? And so I don't remember, again, back to the taking notes thing, I don't remember how much size I had. I just know I was risking probably about 20 to 30 grand or so if we cut it over. I think at this time I put my risk at red-green, moving it down, especially after these adds and the bounces. And again, we chop around, we just go sideways, and before you know it, we're panicking. These covers in hindsight were really, really good. I'm so glad I actually ended up getting all out. I covered it all here. Made about 90K or so. Again, huge win for me, but also, like I said, this, like I mentioned in the previous video, like this trade is this. If you could give me a runner like GTII every week, all year long, I would be the most profitable I've ever been in my entire career, right? This is like the best setup for me, that for my personality and what I enjoy. So the fact that I sized up makes total sense for me and how much I wanted to risk, which was a lot. But again, if you were actually at the Trader Investor Summit in Miami with Tim Sykes, I talked about that a ton in my presentation about like when the times are right, when you understand a setup, and when like the stars align for you, like risk more, because more times than not, it's going to pay out big, and that's what I did here. So same thinking as Finger, right? If we're in a very ideal runner, any bounce should be a great short for an overnight second red day. Now, the one thing I was a little bit worried about is that when OTCs have very big red days, like overly large red days, sometimes the selling has dried up. And the reason why I think that is because if you look at CYDY here, if we go back to when it did go to 10, it had quite the first down day, and then the next day it actually went green, right? See this here? It went from 10 to 4 in the one day, and the next day it actually gapped up and went green, right? So if there's just too much selling, normally there should be a second or third red day, but if there's so much selling in one day that's equivalent to really 2 or 3 days of selling in one day, then you have to be wary of an actual green day. So I did have that in the back of my head for GTII. I did slightly think there was a chance we would do that. But I also was convicted, even if we did, we should have some kind of weakness or opportunity to get out. And so that's why I still went ahead with it. I still got short in these bounces. And again, you see what happens the next day. We actually pull. But again, my suspicions and anxiety about it were right. Eventually, we actually did bounce. We did come back. Selling did dry up. And if you look at my trade here, I was able to cover, I believe, like 20 to 30% of my size here. But unfortunately, I left most of it left for up here. And that's why you see me covering here instead of red-green, because at this point, because it came back so strongly, again, that anxiety, that like superstition or that intuition I had about it probably coming back stronger than I thought was kicking in. I'm like, you know what? Nope, we're not going to do this. I'm not going to give back profits. I'm getting out the rest. And so that's what I did. And I saved myself. So I locked in maybe a few more grand there, ultimately finished up that overall trade from the first and the second overnight hold to about like 92 grand, which was my biggest win here. Again, it was the only ticker I traded on the 5th here, and then was my biggest trade of the month there. So it was really awesome. That was pretty much the first week. That was all the plays that really mattered. I don't even remember what I traded on the 6th and 7th. Coming into week number 2, we started off sweet on Monday with Joule. Joule is a China NASDAQ kind of scam. If you've been following short selling at all, or really any of my videos, or any other, a lot of short sellers have been trading these tickers this year. These kind of scammy China IPOs that kind of, not even IPOs, some are just runners, and they end up dumping, 60, 70, 80% one day. Joule was one of them back in, pretty much the first of the year, the very beginning of the year. And I wasn't really watching it too closely. I don't even remember how I came across it, other than the fact that it was just uptrending again. And I remember it was like a slower day and I didn't have much up on my screen, so I just happened to have screen space for this ticker. And all of a sudden volume starts coming in, right? If we go into the intraday here, all right, we start spiking here and there's like a ton of volume, right? This is like over 100,000 a minute. And I can't help but think to myself, and there was no like alert, right? For those people who have been following the China pumps, there's usually like some kind of like either some pumping rooms, or there's nothing I'm a part of. I don't know any, I'm not personally in any of them because I just haven't really got access. I haven't really either tried that hard either, but I just didn't hear it from anyone who was in them or who is kind of like in the know about them. But all of a sudden these volume starts coming in and I'm like, if the volume keeps up at this pace, it's going to look like only one other day in the chart, and that's when it dropped 70-80%, right? So I'm like, okay, if they're here to dump shares, like the whole reason why they even do these promotions and pumps, this should die, right? And so if you look at my trades here, I end up taking a starter right here. This is actually it was about maybe 10% of my size. In hindsight, I should have gone bigger, right? I should have trusted my gut and that this volume was going to lead to an actual dump. So when we actually started dumping, then you see the ads, right? This was most of my size here. I really, really regret these ads here because it really brought my average down too low. And ultimately, if I didn't add here, I would have been much more prepared to add here, as I pretty much would have taken these ads and put them here. This one candle was just as big as all these. So pretty much like 6 or 7 candles to one. Could have been just a way better average, way more size at a better price. But I also had a very high conviction that when they pump it like this back, especially after a huge jump like this, it's to sell more, right? To get more out. And you can see that with the volume here once they actually start selling it here. And then, I cover into late day. I thought I was going to fade more. I thought we were going to get like $1. We don't. I remember having some overnight, but again, the next day, if we close out here, the next day, we don't really go much lower. Again, just more sideways action. I end up covering it all for about 60 grand. So pretty sweet win. And definitely glad I took the trade. Again, some of these dumps, you don't need a quote unquote like an official alert or an official buy from these promotional rooms, wherever they are. I think people used to call them, like, I don't know if they're still on WeChat. I know that I've heard they're on Telegram. I actually tried downloading Telegram to get in some. I've yet to fail. I don't know how to do it. But anyway, so made 60. There was no official alert, like I said, and that worked. So that was cool. Next in the week was, again, I don't remember these 2 days. I think this day on the 12th was IMUX, and it was an overextended gap down. I tried it like 3 or 4 times, 2K each time, and what do you know, negative 8K, just like that. But on the 13th was MMTLP, and this trade I was actually one of my proudest of, because it was one that I just didn't get chopped up on the front side, right? You've heard me talk about, if you've heard me talk about in September on GTII, I got chopped up pretty harshly on the prior days leading up to this move. I got chopped up certainly on finger, like we just talked about. MMTLP was finally one that I just didn't get too overly aggressive on the front side and timed the backside incredibly well. And so we go here. Now, part of it was due to a little bit of luck, in the sense that when it went red here, I actually didn't fill. I tried shorting some, and it didn't fill me, and I was like, you know what? I don't even think this is that great. Again, if it's going to be any action like it's been the previous days, its spread is kind of wacky. It's not very liquid. This isn't clean action per se. And it was a good decision to cancel my orders, right? Because it was wicked, it swiped right back up and then kept going even higher. And because it did that, I'm like thinking, okay, now it's getting much more ideal. The price action is getting a little bit tighter, not that much better, but every day it's getting more and more volume, right? And so this was the day I actually started shorting. And not only that, again, part of me not filling was, again, a blessing in disguise, because if we look here, I also don't short again out the open. Mainly because it did the same thing the day prior. So I'm like, okay, you know what? It going red doesn't really convince me. It could come back. And what do you know? It does. Now, it doesn't really, it actually has like a fake out. It doesn't, I think it breaks highs. What is this? It actually does break highs by like, what, a few cents here? By like 10 cents. And then fails. And when it did that, I actually did then try to start short. I'm like, okay, this is a pattern or a trend change, especially if it goes back red. And what do you know? I don't fill, right? The fills are tough. And so that's why I don't end up getting short till here, which is in hindsight frustrating, because it would have been nice to get around near green, red green, especially if I was patient and got short into this last bounce before, or just tapped red green here and then came back down. But ultimately ended up having like a 620 average instead of a 660 average. So not the end of the world, but again, it could have been a better risk reward scenario. And I just stayed patient. And what do you know? We panicked. I covered. Didn't really time the bottom that too well. I could have been a little more patient, but overall I took the beat of the move. And I think I ended up making, what was it, 18 grand? Yeah, 18. So very happy with it. Like, this is how I would like to trade. This is the ideal way to do it, in the sense of just, again, got a little bit lucky that I missed it, but then made the right decision of canceling my orders and not shorting the bounce because I just didn't buy it. But just not getting, and I say this because this has been such a trend for me most of this year with any big runner. It's like I get chopped up on the front side, lose way too much, and then I'm aggressive on the backside and either make it all back or I'm up a couple $1,000s, right? This is the first time, no losses on the front side, right? And stayed patient, was very deliberate, very intentional with how I wanted to play it, and it worked out great. So it's something I definitely want to keep going forward to, and I want to kind of keep relaying back in my mind to this play of like how I handle this is how I want to handle almost all runners going in the future. And I've been doing that up the years prior. It's just this year, whether it be the market, whether it be me, it's just very much tougher, and I've had that recurring pattern of kind of getting beaten up and taking too big of losses on the front side. So there's that. And then come Friday here is the moment we've all been waiting for on ILAG. So ILAG, again, isn't like Juul. It is a scammy China IPO. Actually, on the IPO day here, it dumped quite large. I mean, not large. It literally dumped like, again, 70, 80%. I remember I remember talking about it, I believe. Shorting in the low 20s, covered, I believe, either the next day or by like 6 or 7. Made like 105 grand. One of my new, again, when I was talking about in the beginning of this video about some of my new biggest wins, ILAG was one of them, right? ILAG is one of those I can say I made over 6 figures on one trade from it, right? Now, so again, same thing to Juul, slowly uptrending. Again, very pumpish action, whether you're an OTC or NASDAQ. It's got those indicators. And there was rumors around, these WeChat, Telegram chat rooms that an alert is coming, right? And for those who don't know how it works, it's like there's an alert coming, they get people to buy, they use that exit liquidity to get out, hence why the bigger volume is like a signal of that. And there was rumors that alert is coming. We don't know what ticker it is, but it's coming. And so I was watching ILAG and Top as the two main kind of picks. Turns out both of them were. There were 2 in one day. So unfortunately, it really backfired for me on one, ILAG. Top I played really well, which I'll go over after ILAG. But so again, out the open, volume, right? Tons of volume. A little bit, not so much in the middle, but like, you go from little, like almost nothing in the run up, a little bit here, to clearly hundreds of thousands of candles a minute or shares a minute. I'm like, this is it. This looks like Juul. I'm like, here we go. And I went very large. And I didn't go all in, which saved me. Because again, I've always had a rule, never go all in anything. Like that's a recipe for disaster. But even then, I was still in too big. With the intentions of cutting over high a day. At least a third, right? I was prepared for the slippage. I was prepared to get out as much as I possibly could. But I also was prepared to still have some if they did. Because again, similar to ILAG on this day when it IPO'd, they did squeeze it a high day and they brought it down and they dumped it, right? And so I was prepared for that. I was semi-prepared for some kind of move to the upside, covering some, downsizing some, but then expecting a dump later after, right? Unfortunately, I was in for a very, very, very rude awakening. And a lot of traders talked about this on the day they lost, on the day it squeezed. Again, I've mentioned him numerous times now in the previous videos, but Laptop Legend had an incredible video on this, showing the real-time like price action. If you haven't seen the video, I highly suggest you should. It blew up. I'm imagining most of you did. He talks about his losses and what he did wrong, and I commend him for that, because he did lose arguably one of the most that I've seen. I'm sure there were people out there who lost more, but he's the most honest about it. Great, awesome video. And if you watch that replay back, I mean, you see how quick the halts are. And that's where I knew I was screwed, because once it halted, I mean, it was like this. I mean, one, I froze because I was so shocked. But two, even freezing, it wouldn't have mattered if I didn't freeze. The halt was literally in a second. There wasn't enough time for me to even click my button. And unfortunately, at that point, I kind of went into just shock. And if we go here, let's get rid of MTLP. Let's go here. This is the day. And you can see the absolute disaster that this is. I mean, this chart is, I cringe just looking at this thing, right? Like, oh my God. So yeah, like I said, I'm shorting because I see volume, and it halts. Again, I'll go watch that replay of Laptop Legend. I mean, it halts like that. And before you know it, I'm like, okay, this is the squeeze. They're going to dump it eventually. It didn't even register in my mind that they were going to take it as high as 11 or 12. And unfortunately, that's just the reality of me having little to no risk management, right? I had the idea that I was going to cut here, but when I didn't, what happens then? And you can see what happens. I just let it go. I kind of pretty much go into complete gamble mode, and I'm like, I just freeze. I'm like, it's almost like an out of body experience where I'm just kind of there looking at it, and I'm just like, I have left me, right? I am out, and for the only reason why this trade did not blow me up is because I did not go all in, right? That's the only reason why I am still alive and why this account is still here on this particular trade. Because if I did go all in, I wouldn't be here right now. Already at 11 or 12, I was facing and looking at an unrealized P&L of over $500,000. And again, it could have been so much worse, and it would have been easily the biggest loss of my career, hands down. Of course, I have money elsewhere. I would have been okay long-term for my career, but it quickly, what I mentioned in the previous video, it quickly dawned on me that even though the money in my accounts is enough for me to lose, do I ever actually want to lose it? Of course not, right? And your money's in your accounts because you're willing to play and lose with it, but certainly not in one trade. Certainly not being undisciplined like this, and certainly not letting it just go against you like a deer in the headlights, right? And so it kind of just dawned on me, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. And even in this other account here, this account was smaller. This account did blow up, right? It was a 100K account. Unfortunately, again, went way too big. Not all in, but big enough to where by the time we were at 10, 11 bucks, my broker was like, yep, we need to protect you. And I was like, yep, you're right. Because I didn't do it myself. So here we go. And so this account went from like 100K to like 100K to like 14. So I lost 86 grand on this particular ticker right here, on this trade. So again, went from 100K to 14K, gone, boom, see ya, just like that. Very embarrassing, very just, again, cringeworthy as I look at this chart. And so, yeah, between these two trades, it's like I'm looking at an unrealized P&L over $500,000. And so, again, it works. I avoid, it doesn't work. Let's put it that way. I avoid the massive blow up. And unfortunately, as I look back on this, the only way I can remember it was an extreme seesaw of fear and greed, right? Going too big because of greed, being extremely fearful during the squeeze. And then once we die, I'm like, oh my gosh, they've done it. And now they're going to take it down like they've always done it, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60%, right? So when we go here, I'm like, again, the greed takes over. I'm like, I'm not covering. This thing's going to die. As dumb as that is, right? And so when we squeeze back late day, I'm still convicted that it will eventually die, right? But how it gets there, it's still unknown. And so I'm quickly rethinking everything at this point. And I'm for the last hour of the day, I am fighting between conviction and playing it safe, right? So what I end up deciding is I cover a third here. I lost like 40K covering this third here. And I'm going to keep the 2/3 left for it to die. Again, because I was trying to bait, like, am I being overly, I mean, of course I was overly aggressive here, but now that it's died, now that I knew I can risk either this $8 level or this $9 level. I'm certainly not going to risk 12, because again, that's too much. If I wasn't so greedy and covered some down here for like a profit or at least break even, could have been a much better situation. I might have even have added back here, right? But I knew there was all these bag holders now. There's all these prices out of the halts when the halts opened that had a lot of volume in them. So I did have much more conviction in those levels. So I thought to myself, these last 2/3, I'm going to trust this pattern that it's going to play out like all the rest and be down, 40, 50, 60% in a matter of a couple of days. And I was right. It worked. It did eventually actually work out. The next day it collapsed, right? No funny business, no games. It died. Now, unfortunately, I didn't cover any here. And then it bounced. So again, I'm like, all right, I'm already up. I'm up in from 5. My thesis is working. These all fade like the rest of them. Let's give it a few days. I end up covering. I end up start covering into this weakness and this fades. As you see here, this is the trade of my exits, or most of my exits. As we start fading, I'm just covering more and more and more each on the way down. I ended up getting about half off, maybe, I believe, or maybe like a 2/3, not 2/3, like a third to half off in here. Unfortunately, it does bounce again. And because I've locked in profits at this point, I'm just being patient with it. Unfortunately, in hindsight, I'm being too patient. I should have probably just gotten out, but it's like, I've been in this long, might as well just stay in it. Given it doesn't come back, right? Obviously, at this point, I'm risking like these highs here. These 340s, 350s, constant lower lows as we're moving, right? And by the time we come back and start pushing 3 up here, I cover it all. I end up getting out like the 280s here, just saying screw it. Like this is done fading. I don't need to try to squeeze like water out of a rock at this point and try to take it to like sub 2. Even now, we're still not there, right? So ultimately made that loss, the loss I've covered a third here, and then made about like 60K a plus. So like the opposite of finger, right? Instead of losing or making a lot of money and then giving it all back, I lost about 40, ended up making 60, so like a 100K swing. Still terrible in terms of the risk reward of literally losing well more than that, right? But ultimately ended up down between the broker that bought me in at 10.5, and then making money on the other account. I am overall probably down in this thing like 30 or 40 grand. Well, actually like 30 grand. Yeah. And so as I deserve a loss much bigger than that. And going forward, so I guess backtracking into why I think this happened is when a bunch of people who were transparent came on Twitter about their loss on ILAG, it quickly dawned on me how many people were in this, right? And I've seen squeezes before where, shorts are just getting squeezed. It's a typical short squeeze, it's a typical runner. It happens, right? But this one was probably the most violent in the sense that it almost looked as if anyone who short sold was in this. And now that's not true. There were plenty of short sellers who weren't, and actually there were plenty of short sellers who actually played this very well and did get short like above 10 and rode it back down, which is congrats to you guys if you did. But there was just so many more people caught that I ever could imagine. And so that made sense why it was so violent on the halts, why it was like literally less than a second from halting every single open, because anyone who was short was just get me the hell out. The ultimate short squeeze here, right? And so I quickly realized that these China pumps, this setup is getting way too crowded. And it's so easy to breed such large amounts of greed, right? It is so easy to see these things drop 50, 60, 70% and do it in such a volatile and liquid way where you can push it and make a lot of money, right? And I've talked about this in previous videos where my biggest gain of LYT was this play. It just had a ton of volume, it was very heavy, it sold a ton, and if you went aggressive at the right time, you made a lot of money. ILAG shows that the exact opposite could happen, right? It may work out in the end, but getting to that point, if you're not careful, like, can ruin you. So going forward, I'm just gonna put a cap on how much money I can put in them. I'm not gonna want to put in more than like 50K. That's about as much as like dollar size, not shares, dollar size. Given that's why it removes the price of how high or low these are, like just a smaller dollar amount where if it works, great, I'll make 30, 40, 50K. If it doesn't, and I can go back to the traditional and safe cut loss cutting, especially if I go follow my rule about OTC pumps, which is OTC pumps, it's like I try to put on a swing, and if I'm down over 100%, I need to either box or cut it, right? I'm going to take that same rules into ILAG, as well as I'm still trying to figure out and consider how I want to do it with a max stop loss at my broker, whether it be a certain dollar amount or do a max trade loss like on a certain ticker, because I found one reason why I've refrained from doing a max loss for so long is because I found many times there may be a time where I'm tilted or I take a big loss on one trade or even the ticker, but I actually very quickly regroup, very quickly like get myself back grounded and actually take the appropriate trade and make my money back. And not make my money back in the sense of like I'm gambling, right? But make money the correct way, and it ends up making me green because I'm trading safer. I'm reevaluating. I'm actually getting a better entry after cutting. So to put myself in a position where I take a loss and have to cut myself out completely for the day, would only think tilt me more for the next day. So whether it be just a max loss on just one ticker where I just cut it off and maybe I go to another broker to like trade that same ticker in a more grounded way, like I've said that I've done in the past. I think that's what I want to do. And so I think of putting those things into practice is going to keep me safe from having this ever happen again, because I don't ever want to be here again. And something to note, right, when we look at like the trades, because of these big losses, here's the 86 grand that blew up there, or that blow up. It leads to all my losses, my average loss per se, and my average percent loss being bigger. And and if you've watched my videos, you've seen this like almost all year long, right? 11, 10, 14, 3 was good here, hence was a great month. Back to 10, 6, almost 7, that's not terrible. 4, right? So like these months, the February, Marches, and Januaries here, these three, average 3, that was like my bread and butter, right? If you go back to 2021, 2 grand, 4 grand, not even 2 grand, 2,600, 2,500. Like these are the losses I want to be taking, right? If and that's usually what my average risk on like a standard play, like again, not an A+ play where I'm willing to risk, 10, 20, sometimes 30 grand like GTII. But if I'm using a standard risk, I'm always willing to risk around 3 to 6K. And I do that because I'm also willing to take multiple losses on it. Like sometimes, again, I might take 2 or 3 losses, lose 5, 6, 7, 8 grand, and then come back and make 10 or 12 or 14 or 15. That's just how I've done it in the past, and it's worked so well risk reward wise that for whatever reason, my willingness to take and put myself in positions to take these such large losses over the past few months has been like crippling to my strategy and its profitability. And again, you can that's why I went over the average losses. Like you can see it in there. Like you can clearly see it. Even this whole month in general, from risking that blow up to even getting out alive, like it leads to a month where only one trade was my entire month. I could have just traded GTII and been done. Not stress-free, but just one trade, the best trade of the month, arguably the best OTC runner of the year, and I could be done with it, right? And instead I put myself in this whole whirlwind of emotions and fears, or not fears, but potential disasters, right? Of losing an absurd amount of money that just doesn't need to be lost. And so, again, I'm going to do all those things that I just said of following through on. Top was also, again, like I said, it was another one that dumped. I played this one much safer and better than ILAG, and it ultimately led to me actually having less size than I wanted because, again, from being so shaken up from ILAG, I actually was much more skittish on top, which should have been the opposite. I should have been much more aggressive on top. If we look at the trade here, you can see here I'm cutting, right? Like I was short. I was playing with it pre-market a little bit with a little bit of shares, shorted on that volume, cut it when I was like, nope, it's not dumping. Did the same thing here. Started in small, risking 30. And the reason why I did 30 was actually because VRAX, so when HKD ran huge and I took my big loss, VRAX did this exact same thing. It ran from like 20, topped out at 30, and dumped. So did I get lucky and just, combining two tickers, think they'd be the same because they're working the same? Yeah, pretty much. But again, if it went over 30, I would have cut with my small, or small position here. Once it topped out at 30, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm actually right. Shorted some more, had about 60% of my size, covered it here, re-shorted small here, covered that there, and then missed the ultimate dump late day from pretty much 10 to 5 for arguably the biggest percent move of it all. So I ended up making about 20 grand on this. Again, had I been full size, had I waited till low a day, or not low a day, but end of day, could have been close to like high fives, like 80, 90. So not the end of the world. I'm still happy I played it safer and made 20. And that's kind of why I've said I'm going to go back to, I want to go to like only putting 50K in a particular like China pump if I ever play them going forward. Because yeah, I'll make less, but if it means that I'm going to avoid ever putting myself in a position to literally blow up, that is worth it 100% of the time, right? At the end of the day, we all want to make money as traders, but at the bottom line after all of that is staying alive, especially in a tough market like this where I've now heard and personally know some traders that have pretty much lost any gains they've had in the last 2 years. Like that's how tough this market is. So if you're making money, like awesome. That is incredible because the average trader, some traders who've been trading for years, so even some veteran traders, like they're having a difficult time. This year is tough. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it, guys. That's what led me to, and again, that ILAG cover that I showed you was on this day. So I literally swung from Friday, a whole week, and then into Tuesday here. So that was that there. So yeah, 96K in the month. I'm beyond grateful and feel blessed to even be green, guys. Just unearthly terrible. I'm probably going to watch this video back to hear myself talk about it, so I just get a better, more ground understanding of what the hell happened, because I just don't ever want to be there again. I think the rules I'm implementing will stop me from doing that. And another thing too, just a last little final tip for that I'm personally going to do, because I'm not a financial advisor. This isn't any advice for anybody but myself. Sykes made a great point at the conference when I was there, saying, 2020 and 2021 were great years. And if you nailed it and you pushed it, you received more money than you've probably seen in your entire life. I am one of those people. I am now in a situation where I have more money to lose, obviously, but I've never been in this situation before, if that makes sense. And this is true for all traders, where in the sense, like, you have to earn your size, if that makes sense, right? You have to, with every account value and every amount of money you have, the more money you have in your account, the more that needs to be earned every single day, with risk management, with protecting your capital, with proving that you can cut bigger and bigger losses at an appropriate amount that you're willing to risk, right? And so, yeah, down the future, will I be taking 6-figure losses again? Absolutely. But guess what? I'm going to have an account that's 10 times bigger than it is right now. Does that make sense, right? So it's all proportional. And right now, these big losses that I've been taking the last few months, pretty much all this year, have been way out of proportion. And so it's too much money that I'm willing to lose at this stage, and due to my lack of discipline this year. And so I did actually wire quite a significant amount of money out of my accounts after ILAG to keep myself safe, even safer. Sizing down. And again, as you can see, like after these losses, I don't even remember these losses, but again, they're small. They're back to what I want in the 3K range. Even this win is only like 3K. I wish it was more, but it was smaller size. So we're going to go back to that, right? We need to go back to that surviving mentality, that staying safe mentality, because that's what's going to get me. That's how it got me here, right? As I showed you in all the previous months. So anyways, guys, I'm sure this video has gone way too long, but thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys learned a lot. I know I certainly did, reflecting on this for the last couple weeks. And again, going into November and December, just want to stay safe. And again, these last 2 months, these last 2 weeks, I didn't even talk about it because they're just incredibly slow. Like if this week is anything like the last week or so, this will be the slowest period for me in probably all year. I know it's been a little bit slow in general, but pretty much every day I feel like I have to show up because there's just nothing. So we'll see. Again, taking day by day. I think at the end of the day, again, staying alive is what's important in a market like this. So thanks so much, guys. I will see you next time.